The Wakefield case is a fascinating case of integrity because it's had such a major impact and it's had such a long-lasting impact, and it shows some of the responsibilities of what we're doing. And of course, that was in a prestigious journal and went through a peer review and all the rest of it. So it went through the scientific process, and yet it had that impact. But it had that impact, what went wrong in that Wakefield process? What went wrong was the way in which the research was done, the way in which research was then pushed out, was then published, and then the way in which that research was then dealt with after the publication event in terms of disseminating it in an inappropriate manner or with certain twists and biases onto it, and the ability to actually deal with that one. And so I think, we have got two problems here. We've got the problem of how do you take good research or less good research or pretty good research and move it better and make it higher quality, and how do you deal with what I think is actually a small rump on anything, which are egregious misconduct. And I would be putting the Wakefield in the latter one, and I'm afraid I don't think it's easy to get systems that deal with that in advance very easily.
But I think there's a bigger issue which relates to this trust in science question, which all this stacks up around, and of course it's very relevant to your point about vaccines, and then that gets into how we communicate science to the public, and the question of not always having all the answers. And our responsibility as scientists is, this is what I know, this is what I don't know, and this is what I'm going to find out and come back and tell you. But my best advice to you now is X. And that was some of the balance, of course, that was going on, of course, during the pandemic, and others in the room better able to explain that process. So there is something about how we communicate science. And then there's another issue which I think we're addressing now. We're talking about science in journals, but we have to think about the communication methods that are used. You're a BBC journalist, you communicate, but many people are getting their science communication through all sorts of other social media. Absolutely not my competence. But I think we do have to think about how, as scientists, we communicate in ways that are trustworthy and which engage the public, and also what we do about disinformation, because that's another extremely complicated issue, which I think will also be very much in your bailiwick as an investigative journalist. What do you do about the transmission of misinformation?
And the thing about science is science evolves. We make mistakes. It's okay to make a mistake. It's okay to change your mind, because we're always learning. But the general public have a sense that if a scientist says something, it must be right. In the way that if a doctor says something, it must be right. And that there is no understanding that scientists change their mind. The fact scientists change their mind means, there's a conspiracy theory going on. It must all be, And then when they see too many different thoughts sort of presented, then it's all hands, I don't know what to do, One scientist says this and the other scientist said that.
The Bureau, we have a team, a big tech team, who is entirely focused on issues around disinformation at the moment. But we certainly saw just an incredible rise in both mis and disinformation, the two separate issues here. One is the spread of information that people think is correct and that scares people on social media, for example. And the other is disinformation, for example, pushed out by governments who want to sort of sow chaos. I can speak a little to misinformation, the sense that you can log on to Twitter and find 100 people saying the thing that you fear most. We went into the pandemic without any answers. None of us knew what was going on, not even the scientists. And when we looked, I say we as the general public, we looked to experts and we said, please tell us what's going on. And of course, scientists can only tell us as much as they know. And at the beginning, it was, we don't really know, where we suggest washing your hands. Yeah. And of course, that information was our best guess at the time, and it wasn't wrong to give out that information in the spring of 2020. But at the point at which we understood that this thing was going to be spread through the air, through speaking. We need to wear masks. It was very difficult to switch people, to reorientate people, to understand the scientists understood better now, and this is actually what we need to do. And of course, underneath all of that was the wave of pushback that many people latched onto, which was anti-science in the same way that we see anti-vax. People didn't want to wear masks, they didn't want to be locked down, they were very frightened of this brand new thing that no one understood. And I think I don't have the answer for you on how we combat this, but I do think that it was an extraordinary moment in the spring and summer of 2020 that we can learn a lot from, both in terms of scientists and as science communicators.